This building has sunk 18 inches into the ground. It's tilted over 2 feet sideways since it opened. And right now, it's still sinking. This is Millennium Tower, the most expensive high-rise disaster in American history, and people still live inside it. 58 stories, 419 feet tall, home to Joe Montana, a former Major League Baseball commissioner, and some of the most expensive condos in San Francisco. When it opened in 2009, it was marketed as the tallest residential tower west of Chicago, a symbol of the city's booming tech-era wealth. It quickly became one of the most sought-after buildings in the country. Units sold for up to $10 million each. But here's the number that should have terrified every single buyer before they signed. The tower's foundation only reaches about 80 feet into the ground, through soft landfill, not solid bedrock. The building right next door, Salesforce Tower, drilled through that same ground and kept going, more than 300 feet down until it hit solid rock. Millennium Tower's engineers decided that extra depth wasn't necessary for a building this size. They were wrong by about 200 feet, a gap that would come back to define everything that happened next. Here's the twist almost nobody knows. The ground underneath Millennium Tower isn't really ground at all. Much of San Francisco's financial district sits on land that didn't exist 150 years ago. After the 1906 earthquake and fire, the city filled in the shoreline with rubble, ash, and debris, creating new land where the bay used to be. That fill is soft. It compresses and shifts under weight in a way solid bedrock simply doesn't. The engineers behind Millennium Tower knew this going in. Building codes in earthquake zones like San Francisco typically call for foundations anchored straight into bedrock, precisely because loose fill settles unevenly over time. At the time, a different kind of foundation was an approved, commonly used method in the city for buildings of this size. Millennium Tower's designers argued the numbers worked. Instead, they chose something different, a friction pile foundation. Nearly 1,000 concrete piles, driven deep into that fill, held in place purely by the friction of the soil, gripping their sides, not resting on rock, essentially floating in compacted mud, sand, and rubble. It was cheaper to build. It was faster to build. And on paper, the calculations said it would hold just fine. But nobody had stress-tested those numbers against decades of that fill continuing to compact under nearly 600 million pounds of concrete and steel. It worked for about 4 years. By 2016, 7 years after the tower opened, residents started noticing problems. Cracks spreading across the parking garage walls, doors that wouldn't close flush against their frames anymore, windows that jammed shut. At first, building management brushed it off as normal settling, something every new high-rise experiences in its first few years as concrete cures and the ground beneath it adjusts. But an independent survey commissioned by worried homeowners told a very different story. The tower had sunk 16 inches into the ground and tilted 14 inches at its base. And because it's a rigid structure, that tilt doesn't stay the same as you go up. The higher you are in the building, the more the lean multiplies. Engineers ran the numbers on what happens if a major earthquake hits while the foundation is already compromised. San Francisco sits directly on the Hayward and San Andreas faults, the same fault system responsible for the devastating 1989 quake and the catastrophic 1906 quake that reshaped the entire city. A structural engineer hired by the Homeowners Association testified that in a sufficiently strong quake, the compromised foundation could fail in ways that put the entire tower at risk. From the street, none of this is visible. The building still looks like every other glass tower on the skyline. City building inspectors who had cleared the tower for occupancy years earlier were now facing their own scrutiny. Questions about how a foundation this thin on paper had ever passed a final safety review in the first place. Insurance companies began adjusting their exposure. Some banks reportedly grew hesitant to issue new mortgages for a handful of units still listed for sale, unsure how to price risk for a building whose long-term structural future was, at best, contested. That's what makes it more unsettling, not less. You can't see the danger from outside. The lawsuits started stacking up almost immediately. The developer blamed the transit authority for a nearby underground excavation project happening at the same time construction wrapped up. The transit authority blamed the developer's foundation design. The city, which had approved the permits in the first place, found itself named in the litigation too. Homeowners, including Joe Montana and his wife, filed suit, seeking damages for a building that no longer matched what they were sold. Engineering assessments commissioned during the litigation put the estimated repair cost above $100 million. And that number has only grown as the case has dragged on. The proposed fix sounds almost impossible, drilling dozens of new steel piles down through the existing foundation, past the soft fill, all the way to bedrock, while the 58-story tower keeps standing above the work. And it has to happen while the building stays fully occupied. Residents living their normal lives, several hundred feet above a foundation being surgically replaced beneath them. As of the most recent reporting, that repair effort has faced its own delays, cost overruns, and disputes over whether the fix is actually stopping the sinking. Some engineers say the tilt has slowed. Others say it's too early to know whether it's stopped for good or just paused. Every year the litigation continues, legal fees climb into the tens of millions. Money that could otherwise go toward the repair itself. Some legal experts note that even if the homeowners win outright, collecting from a developer already fighting several fronts at once could take years, meaning the people living with the sinking, tilting reality of Millennium Tower may end up waiting the longest of anyone in this story. Millennium Tower isn't fixed. At best, right now, it's being carefully managed. The people living in Millennium Tower didn't buy a bad building. They bought what was marketed and priced as one of the most engineered, most prestigious addresses in California. For many, it wasn't just an investment. It was where their kids went to school, where they'd planned to retire. Now they own condos that are difficult, sometimes impossible, to sell at anything close to what they paid, sitting inside a structure that is, by any honest definition, still failing. Real estate agents in the city say the building's reputation has made buyers more cautious across San Francisco's entire luxury condo market. Slowly, expensively, very publicly, in a city where you can see this building from half a dozen different neighborhoods. Some residents have simply walked away from millions of dollars in equity just to get out from under the uncertainty. Others are staying, betting the repair holds, and that the lawsuits eventually settle in their favor. It's a strange kind of limbo, not condemned, not collapsed, just quietly, continuously sinking while lawyers argue over who's responsible. And it's still sinking. Millennium Tower proves something uncomfortable. In a city built on some of the most active fault lines in America, being fast and cheap on a foundation is a bet against physics. Eventually, physics collects. Should the city help pay for a fix it approved? Or did the developers alone gamble with 400 families' safety? Tell me what you think.